Good, happy Sunday, everyone. I'm Riley King. Welcome to this Sunday edition of This Week with Riley King. Let's get started right now. First up, Scott Gottlieb, MD, weighs in on New York City's plan to fully reopen the city by July 1st. Let's take a listen to that video from Face the Nation.
Capturing all the negative tests.
You mentioned San Francisco. Let me ask you about New York City. Mayor Bill de Blasio has said New York City will fully reopen on July 1st, even though New York State has the sixth highest count of new cases over the last 7 days. What's your assessment of that decision by the New York mayor?
Look, I think as we look out into the summer, we're going to be able to resume normal activity or something resembling normal activity. There's still going to be a layer of protection on top of what we do. I think people are still going to be cautious, but this is going to be a relatively quiescent summer when it comes to coronavirus spread. New York's doing a lot of testing. New York's leading the country really in testing, so they're turning over a lot of their cases, and we're not even capturing all the negative tests. There's a lot of testing going on at home now with at-home tests that aren't necessarily getting reported unless they're positive cases. So I think the positivity rate around the country is even lower than what we're recording. But we're seeing cases come down. We're seeing hospitalizations come down, which is really the hardest measure of the overall impact of COVID. Hospitalizations are a pretty good indicator of where the direction is heading, and they're coming down as well. So I think these gains are pretty sustainable at this point.
Okay, and there you go on that video and that report. Secretary Yellen addresses the Biden admin's proposed infrastructure plan, says we need fiscal space to be able to address emergencies like the pandemic. Over the long run, difficult and defense needs to be continued. I believe we should pay for these historic investments. Let's take a listen to that video from NBC News.
And I agree.
There's quite a few Democratic senators that are now talking about the idea of maybe we don't need to raise all of these taxes. And you just made a case, for instance, on infrastructure that, these are investments and that they're worthy of deficit spending. If this bill comes back to the president without these pay-fors, the president's still going to sign it?
Well, I'm not going to speak for what the president will do in a negotiation, but he has made clear that he believes that permanent increases in spending should be paid for, and I agree. I think we're in a good fiscal position. Interest rates are historically low. They've been that way for a long time, and it's likely they'll stay that way into the future. But we do need fiscal space to be able to address emergencies like the one that we've been in with respect to the pandemic. We don't want to use up all of that fiscal space, and over the long run, deficits need to be contained to keep our federal finances on a sustainable basis. So I believe that we should pay for these historic investments. There will be a big return. I expect productivity to rise. There will be great returns from investing in research and development and enabling families to participate with paid leave and child care support in the workforce. So I think it's true that a stronger economy will generate more tax revenues, but I think the safest thing is to pay for them, and we're doing it in a way that's fair. I should also mention that an important way of paying for this is increasing tax compliance. it's estimated that underpayment of taxes that are really due is costing us, the federal government, about $7 trillion over a decade. And there's an important proposal here to increase compliance, to fund the IRS so that, and this is a matter of fairness, to increase and collect the tax revenue that's due under our tax code.
Okay, and there you go on that video. Senator Sanders says the U.S. has a moral responsibility to help the rest of the world in the fight against COVID. It is also in our self-interest because if this pandemic continues to spread in other countries, it is going to come back and bite us at one point or another. Let's take a listen to that video from NBC News.
Just about our vaccine supply. We have, obviously, the virus is pretty out of control in India. It's not in good shape in Brazil. These are two pretty big countries that could have an impact on us, both our health and our economy. Our vaccine distribution, we have a lot here. Should we start sharing it faster than we are now, particularly when you see what's going on in our hemisphere and in India? Should we be more aggressive here? It seems like we've been a bit, some might argue, overly cautious about our vaccine supply.
Well, I think a couple of things, Chuck. The answer is yes. I think we've got to obviously make sure that every American gets vaccinated as quickly as possible. But I do think not only do we have a moral responsibility to help the rest of the world, it's in our own self-interest. Because if this pandemic continues to spread in other countries, it's going to come back and bite us at one point or another. But the second thing we should do is not only make sure that excess vaccines in the United States get around to countries that need it, we should deal with this issue through the World Trade Organization of protecting the intellectual property rights of the drug companies. And I think what we have got to say right now to the drug companies, when millions of lives are at stake around the world, yes, allow other countries to have these intellectual property rights so that they can produce the vaccines that are desperately needed in poor countries. There is something morally objectionable about rich countries being able to get that vaccine, and yet millions and billions of people in poor countries are unable to afford it.
Okay, and there you go on that video and that report. "10 years later, Martha Radis goes inside the secret raid where U.S. Navy SEALs killed Bin Laden." Let's take a listen to that video from ABC News this week.
There is one
It was, in fact, 10 years ago this very weekend when Joe Biden was vice president that U.S. Navy SEALs killed Osama Bin Laden in a secret and daring raid on a compound in Pakistan. That raid coming after one of the most intense manhunts in history.
There is one report, as of yet unconfirmed, that a plane has hit the World Trade Center.
Osama bin Laden was the most wanted man on earth, escaping from the mountains of Afghanistan, even as U.S. intelligence and military scoured those rugged mountains. But on May 1st, 2011, 10 years after hijacked airliners brought down the World Trade Towers and a chunk of the Pentagon, Geronimo. And Geronimo meant...
we got Bin Laden, killed him.
Admiral Mike Mullen was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs at the time. That's him behind President Obama in the White House as they watched the Navy SEALs descend on Bin Laden's compound in real time.
There was a lot of risk. We felt comfortable that we could get in and out of Pakistan without being detected in a timely way. We felt we could get into the compound.
And for Mullen, it was personal. He was in the Pentagon a decade earlier when one of the hijacked planes slammed into it.
The plane flew in basically under my office. My two assistants looked out the window and saw a 757 fly in under their feet.
The Navy lost 42 people that day among the nearly 200 killed in the attack on the Pentagon. 10 years later, it was the Navy that would dominate that raid on the Bin Laden compound, Mullen meeting those SEALs before they headed into Pakistan.
Sort of the final dress rehearsal that I went to, it involved upwards of 48 to 50 SEALs. And then I specifically met and shook hands and looked every operator in the eye to, one, express my gratitude, two, are they ready to go? And I was very confident that they were.
But in the days leading up to the raid, secrecy was paramount.
You needed to keep this very, very close, because if Bin Laden or his people had gotten wind of any potential operation there, he would have been gone.
And Mike Mullen and all those involved in the raid knew how to keep a secret.
Please welcome the President of the United States of America.
Just 24 hours prior to the raid, President Obama and others involved in the operation were at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Even a joke about what was believed to be the failure to find Bin Laden did not throw the president.
People think Bin Laden is hiding in the Hindu Kush, but did you know that every day from 4 to 5 he hosts a show on C-SPAN?
I remember taking pictures with you, seeing you. I knew you pretty well. I never would have known anything was up.
But I think what made it all work at the White House Correspondents' Dinner is we acted as if everything was normal, and that was the plan.
But not everything went according to plan. There was the harrowing moment when one of the helicopter's tail sections hit a compound wall.
That picture captures a lot of intensity. It was incredibly intense, and it almost froze the place.
But as Mullen and then Vice President Biden clutched their Catholic rosary rings, the skill of that helicopter pilot saved the day. Minutes later, the Navy SEALs entered the compound and took out Bin Laden.
And right after we heard Geronimo, I looked down to the Vice President, and he's getting his wallet out, and he's about to put his rosary ring, into his wallet. I turned to him and I said, Mr. Vice President, I've got 48 or 49 American sailors and soldiers illegally in a country. I've still got to fly them out. I've got to get them back to Jalalabad, and then I've got to fly them through Pakistani airspace to get the body out to an aircraft carrier and bury him. Please put that ring back on. Now's not the time to stop praying.
I suspect he put that ring back on.
He did.
Hours later, with the mission fully complete, Mullen left the White House to celebrations echoing around him.
I left alone, and I walked by the Rose Garden, and I could hear out in Lafayette Square this chanting, USA, USA. USA! 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 Dominated by young voices. And that's sort of when it really hit me, is how significant it was. That these young men and women who had been 9 or 10, I think, when the towers were taken down, that it was such an extraordinary moment for them. And that really, that was the moment for me that kind of raised it to how significant this really was.
Indeed it was, and eventually led to the demise of al-Qaeda. I asked the Admiral how he feels about President Biden's decision to withdraw all U.S. forces after 20 years. He said while he has concerns, it is the right decision. It's time to come home.
Okay, and there you go on that video and that report. And that does it for this edition of This Week with Riley King. Thank you for watching and have a great rest of your Sunday. See you back here next time for another edition of This Week with Riley King. Goodbye.